A human warship emerged out of thin air. The Galactic Empire underestimated humanity. The stars had always been there, cold, silent, and full of things that humanity had not yet met. For thousands of years, humans looked up at the night sky and wondered if something was looking back. Then, one day, something was. The Velthari Empire made contact 43 years ago. It was not a warm introduction. There were no greetings, no celebrations, no shared meals between species. There was only a signal, clean, powerful, and impossible to misread. It came from a fleet of ships parked just beyond the orbit of Neptune, and the message was simple. Earth had been observed. Earth had been evaluated. Earth was now considered a low-tier world under the protection and authority of the Galactic Empire. Humanity was expected to comply with all future directives. No response was required. The people of Earth had stared at that message for a long time. Some cried. Governments called emergency meetings that lasted for days. Religious leaders spoke in crowded halls. Scientists argued over translations. Philosophers wrote long, complicated essays that most people never read. But when all the noise settled, when the panic faded into something quieter and harder, the leaders of Earth sat down together and made a decision. They said nothing back to the Velthari Empire. Not a single word. No response, no protest, no request for negotiation. Earth simply went silent, and it stayed silent. The Velthari took this as confirmation that humanity understood its place. A primitive species, barely capable of traveling between planets, had correctly recognized the gap between itself and a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 6,000 years. The Empire moved on to other concerns. Humanity was filed away as a minor footnote, a small, wet world at the edge of a quiet solar system, populated by short-lived creatures who were not worth much attention. That was the first mistake. Emperor Dagon of the Velthari was not a cruel leader by the standards of his people. He was practical. He ran his empire the way a carpenter runs a workshop. Everything had a place, everything had a purpose, and anything that did not fit was removed cleanly. He had expanded the empire across 212 star systems. He had absorbed 64 species into the imperial order. Some had fought back. None had succeeded. When his advisors brought him updated reports on Earth 43 years after first contact, he was mildly annoyed. The humans had not registered as a vassal world. They had not sent tribute. They had not responded to any of the 17 directives the Empire had issued over the decades. They had simply continued existing, quietly, on their small blue planet, as if the Empire was not there. Dagon found this irritating, in the way that a man finds a small stone in his shoe irritating. It was not dangerous, it was just annoying. He called in Admiral Kira. Kira was one of his best officers, tall, efficient, and completely without sentiment. She had pacified 11 worlds in her career, and had never once needed to be asked twice. Dagon gave her 300 warships, far more than was necessary, but he wanted the message to be loud, and sent her to Earth with simple instructions. Register the planet. Collect the first tribute payment. If anyone resisted, demonstrate the consequences briefly, and then collect the tribute anyway. Kira took the assignment without comment, and left within the week. The Imperial fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system on a Tuesday. It took them less than 2 days to cross the distance to Mars, where Kira decided to stop and set up her command position. She looked at the data her scouts had gathered, and felt something very close to boredom. Earth had ships, not many, and nothing impressive. Their most advanced vessels were slow, lightly armed, and clearly built for exploration rather than war. They had small stations orbiting their moon and a few outposts on Mars itself, but nothing that could be called a military presence in any serious sense. The humans had not even attempted to build a defensive perimeter around their planet. Kira leaned back in her command chair and began drafting the formal surrender document she would send to Earth's governments. She gave them generous terms, by imperial standards. They would keep their culture, their languages, their governments. They would simply pay tribute, follow imperial trade rules, and provide labor to designated projects. It was a better deal than most species got. She sent the document and gave Earth 48 hours to respond. Deep beneath the mountains of the Korean peninsula, in a facility that did not appear on any public map, Commander Tae stood in front of a wall of screens and read the Empire's surrender document word by word. He was a quiet man. Not unfriendly, not cold, just quiet in the way that people become quiet when they have been thinking hard about something for a very long time. He had been the director of Project Hollow for 11 years, and before that, he had spent 9 years helping design the program from the ground up. He had given most of his adult life to a single question. What do you do when the most powerful force in the galaxy tells you to kneel? His answer had always been the same. You make sure they regret asking. Captain Rena stood beside him, reading the same document. She was younger than Tae by about a decade, with the kind of calm that came not from ease, but from complete focus. She had been the lead test pilot for the Phase Fold program. She had taken the first ship through a fold and come back. She had done it 47 more times after that, each run pushing the system harder, testing the limits, finding where the edges were. She finished reading and set her tablet down on the console beside her. 48 hours, she said quietly. Yes, Tae said. Are we ready? Tae looked at the screens for a moment. One of them showed a live feed from a camera mounted high on a ridge outside. Just mountains and sky. The kind of view that reminded a person how old the world was, and how long it had been getting along just fine without anyone's permission. We've been ready for 2 years, he said. I just wanted to make sure they were committed. Rena nodded slowly. You did not want to show a hand like this to someone who might still turn around and leave. You needed them all the way in. You needed them certain of their victory, comfortable in their assumption, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Outside the facility, under the mountain, in a chamber so large it had its own weather at the ceiling, the UNSS Baekdu waited in the dark. It did not look like a ship that was about to change history. It looked like exactly what it was, a weapon built by a species that had been quietly furious for 43 years, and had spent every single one of those years preparing for this exact moment. Tae picked up his radio and spoke 2 words. Begin countdown. A human warship emerged out of thin air. The Galactic Empire underestimated humanity. The countdown was not dramatic. There were no alarms, no flashing lights, no crew running across the floor shouting orders. The facility beneath the mountain was calm and quiet, the way a place becomes calm when the people inside it have rehearsed something so many times that doing it for real feels almost ordinary. The UNSS Baekdu sat in its underground chamber, connected to 100 different systems by cables and conduits and power lines as thick as a man's arm. Crew members moved through the corridors inside the ship with the focused efficiency of people who had a job to do, and fully intended to do it. Every station was manned, every system was checked, every reading was logged, confirmed, and checked again. Commander Tae walked slowly through the facility's main observation deck, and watched through the thick glass as the final preparations were made. Fuel cells were sealed. Fold drive capacitors charged to their last stage. The ship's weapons were armed but locked. Not because anyone expected a fight yet, but because protocol was protocol, and Tae had not survived this long by being careless about protocol. Behind him, Dr. Yuno sat at a long console, surrounded by 3 assistants, all of them watching numbers on screens with the intensity of people who had spent decades making those numbers mean something. Yuno was the oldest person in the room, and probably the most dangerous, in the way that people who understand things very deeply are always the most dangerous people in any room. She had been the one who solved it. The phase-fold problem had defeated physicists for generations. The idea was simple enough, in the way that all the best ideas are simple once someone finally explains them correctly. Normal space, the kind of spaceships travel through, the kind you can see and measure, is not the only layer of reality. Beneath it, or beside it, the geometry made the language difficult. There exists what physicists call fold space, not empty space, not another dimension in the old science fiction sense, more like the inside of a fold in fabric, a place that exists between the visible surfaces of reality. Things inside fold space do not register in normal space. They cannot be seen, tracked, scanned, or detected by any instrument calibrated to read normal space phenomena, because they are not, technically, in normal space at all. They are in the fold. The fold has no fixed location relative to normal space, which means a ship inside it is not at any particular place, it simply is not there. The hard part was getting in and getting out without destroying the ship in the process. Unmanned probes went in and did not come back. Then probes went in and came back as wreckage. Then probes went in and came back intact, but with their data wiped. The problem was the interface. The moment of transition between normal space and fold space was a place of almost incomprehensible physical stress. And for a long time, nothing built by human hands could survive it intact. Yuno's solution was not elegant. She would have been the first to admit that. It was more like a workaround than a true answer. She did not solve the interface problem so much as she taught the ship to survive it anyway, by wrapping the hull in a field that translated the transitional stress into heat, and then vented that heat into the fold itself during the crossing. It emerged into fold space with its systems intact, its crew alive, and its position in normal space completely unknown to anyone looking from the outside. Because from the outside, it was not there. It had simply stopped existing. Yuno had described it once, during a late-night briefing that Tay still remembered clearly, as the most honest thing humanity had ever built. She said a ship that could vanish was really just a ship that had finally told the truth about how small and invisible humans had always been made to feel. Then she laughed at herself for being philosophical and went back to her calculations. Tay had never forgotten that. It took 22 years from Yuno's first working model to a full-scale vessel. The Baekdu was not the first ship to fold. There had been 12 test vessels before it, and 3 of those had been crewed. But it was the first one built for war. The first one with weapons capable of threatening a Velthari command ship. The first one with a full drive powerful enough to re-emerge at a precise chosen coordinate rather than just somewhere in the general area. That last part had taken the longest. Accuracy was everything. A ship that appeared 1,000 kilometers from its target was useful, but not decisive. A ship that appeared right beside its target, inside the formation, at point-blank range, weapons already charged and aimed, was something else entirely. That was not just a weapon. That was a statement. Rena had made the first precision fold on her 29th attempt. She had brought the test ship out of fold space within 400 meters of a target buoy in deep space, traveling at combat speed with every weapon system live. She had sat in the pilot's seat afterward for a long time before she said anything, and when she did say something, it was only 3 words. We have it. By the time Admiral Kira's fleet parked itself around Mars and sent its surrender document, humanity had 39 more ships capable of phasefold. They were scattered across 11 different hidden facilities, underground, undersea, on the dark side of the moon. None of them had ever been detected. None of them had ever been close to being detected, because a ship that was never powered up and never moved and sat in a shielded chamber under a mountain was for all practical purposes invisible to anyone scanning from orbit. The Velthari had done thorough scans of Earth when they first arrived. They had confirmed what they already believed, that humanity was unarmed, unready, and no danger to anyone. In the facility beneath the mountain, Tay walked back to the observation window and looked down at the Baekdu one more time. The countdown clock on the wall behind him read 11 minutes. Rena appeared beside him, already in her flight suit, helmet under her arm. "The crew is ready," she said. "All systems are green." "Any hesitation from anyone?" She shook her head. "None." Tay looked at the ship. He thought about the 43 years, the silence, the 17 directives Earth had never answered. The quiet, furious patience of a species that knew it was not ready yet, and refused to move until it was. "Show them what we built." Rena put her helmet on and walked toward the boarding ramp without looking back. Down in the chamber, the power cells of the UNSS Baekdu hummed to life, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard, moving up through the floor and into the bones of everyone standing in the facility. The lights on the ship shifted from standby amber to full operational white. 9 minutes. In the full drive core at the center of the ship, something that did not yet have a proper name began to happen. Space, in a very small and very specific way, began to fold. 8 minutes. Outside, far above, under a sky full of cold stars, 300 Valthari warships waited around Mars in perfect formation, and Admiral Kira reviewed her surrender document and thought about what she would have for dinner. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. A human warship emerged out of thin air. The Galactic Empire underestimated humanity. Admiral Kira was in the middle of a sentence when it happened. She was standing at the head of the command table on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, dictating the final terms of the surrender document to her aide. The fleet around her was calm. Her sensors showed nothing unusual. Earth's tiny collection of ships had not moved. The planet below was quiet. Everything was proceeding exactly the way she expected it to proceed, which was to say, without resistance, without surprise, and without anything worth remembering. She was explaining the tributary payment schedule when every sensor panel on the bridge lit up at once. Not a warning light, not a proximity alert, not even a threat signal, because the threat signal requires the system to have at least a moment's notice that something is approaching. This was every screen, every panel, every readout suddenly screaming with data that had not been there 1 second ago, as if the universe itself had simply forgotten to include something, and then dropped it in without warning. Kira stopped talking. She turned to her sensor station. "Report," she said. Her sensor officer, a young Valthari named Thos, was staring at his screens with an expression that Kira had never seen on a trained officer's face before. It took her a moment to identify it, because she had not expected to see it here, in what was supposed to be a routine operation. It was genuine confusion. "Admiral," Thos said slowly, "there is a contact, directly off our port side. Range, 412 meters. 412 meters, not 400 kilometers, not 4,000. 412 meters. Barely more than the length of the Eternal Dominion itself. Whatever was out there had not approached. It had not launched. It had not fired its engines and burned across space toward them. It was simply there, close enough that Kira could theoretically have seen it through a viewport, parked beside her ship like it had always been there, and she had simply failed to notice. "How did it get there?" she asked. He kept checking his readings, as if doing so a 4th or 5th time would produce a different result. On the bridge of the UNSS Baekdu, Captain Rena felt the fold exit the way she always felt it. A brief second of absolute nowhere, a moment of complete sensory absence that was not darkness or silence or cold, but simply the absence of all of those things and everything else, followed by a sharp, clean return to reality, like breaking the surface of water after a deep dive. Normal space came back all at once. Screens, sounds, gravity, weight. the subtle vibration of the ship's systems through the deck plates under her feet. She checked her position readout. 412 meters from the Eternal Dominion, within the acceptable margin. She had wanted 400 even, but this was close enough. "Systems check," she said. Reports came back from every station within seconds. Full drive nominal. Weapons charged and locked. Hull temperature elevated, but within the safe range. The exit heat was venting clean. Communications were live. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Rena leaned forward slightly in her command chair and looked at the Eternal Dominion through the main viewport. It was a big ship. The Velthari built their flagships large, the way powerful civilizations often did, partly for the practical benefit of space, and partly because size communicated something. It was a statement. "We are large, therefore we are strong, therefore you are small, therefore you should obey." Rena had looked at images of Velthari flagships many times over the years. She had studied their weapons, their armor, their shield configurations, their crew sizes. She had spent a great deal of time understanding exactly how dangerous one of these ships was, because understanding danger was the first step toward not being killed by it. But sitting here now, 400 meters away, she found that the ship did not look the way she had expected it to look. It looked surprised, which was not a thing ships could look, technically. But the way it sat there, unmoving, no weapons deploying, no shields shifting into combat configuration, no evasive action, it looked like exactly what it was. A very large, very powerful machine that had absolutely no idea what to do next. She opened a channel. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the communications panel chimed. An open channel request, coming from the unknown contact. Kira stared at it for a moment. Then she accepted it. The voice that came through was calm. Not aggressive, not nervous, not the trembling voice of a frightened species begging for mercy. Just calm, steady and even. The voice of someone who had thought about this moment for a very long time, and was now simply doing the thing they had prepared to do. "Admiral Kira," the voice said, in clean, unaccented Imperial Standard. "My name is Captain Rena, of the UNSS Baekdu, United Nations Spaceship, Earth. I am speaking on behalf of the people of Earth and the United Earth Defense Command." Kira said nothing. She was still processing. "I want to be straightforward with you," Rena continued. "I am not here to negotiate the terms of your surrender document. I am here to deliver a message. The message is this: humanity has been listening to everything the Velthari Empire has said about us for 43 years. We have heard ourselves described as primitive, unarmed, unthreatening, minor, not worth serious attention." There was a brief pause. "We would like to offer a correction." Kira found her voice. "You are one ship," she said. "One ship in violation of Imperial space. Whatever technology you use to appear here, it changes nothing. I have 300 warships in this system." "I know," Rena said. "I'd like to tell you about the others." Kira's eyes moved to Thos. He was already running expanded sensor sweeps, pushing the fleet's detection range out as far as it would go, scanning for additional contacts. He ran the sweep twice. He ran it a third time. He looked up and shook his head. Nothing. "There are no others," Kira said. "Your trick was impressive. Your ship appearing from nothing. That is not something we have seen before. I will admit that. But you are alone, and you are surrounded." "Admiral," Rena said, and her voice was not unkind, "our ships do not appear on sensors until we choose to appear. That is the point. I have 39 more vessels exactly like this one, currently in fold space, waiting for my signal. Your sensors won't find them until they're already next to you." The bridge was very quiet. "That is a claim," Kira said carefully. "It is," Rena agreed. "And I understand why you would want to verify it rather than simply take my word for it. That is a reasonable position. Another pause. You have 10 minutes to contact Emperor Dagon and discuss a renegotiation of your demands toward Earth. At the end of 10 minutes, whether you have made that contact or not, I will signal my fleet to emerge. I suggest you use the time well. The channel stayed open. Rhina did not close it, did not add anything further, did not threaten or warn or beg. She simply waited, calm and quiet, 400 meters off the port side of the most powerful warship in the Imperial fleet, as if she had nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world. Kira looked at her bridge crew. Every face was watching her. She looked out through the viewport at the Baekdu, dark, enormous, perfectly still, and felt for the first time in her career something she had not felt in a very long time. She was not sure what to do. A human warship emerged out of thin air. The Galactic Empire underestimated humanity. Kira used 4 of her 10 minutes trying to reach Emperor Dagon. The signal took time to travel. The Eternal Dominion was parked around Mars, and Dagon's throne world was 11 light hours away. A real-time conversation was impossible. She sent a compressed message packet. Priority 1, Fleet Command Cipher. The kind of signal that Dagon's communication staff was required to interrupt him for, regardless of what he was doing. And then she stood at the front of her bridge and thought hard while she waited. She thought about the ship sitting 400 meters off her port side. She thought about what it would mean if the human captain was telling the truth. She thought about what it would mean if she was lying. She ran both scenarios forward in her mind, following the logic of each one, and she did not like where either of them ended. If the captain was lying, and there were no other ships, then this was an act of desperation. One vessel with a clever trick, trying to bluff a fleet of 300 into backing down. In that case, opening fire and destroying the Baekdu was the correct response. It would be unpleasant. It might cause a small scandal back home, since the humans had not technically fired first, but that could be managed. If the captain was telling the truth, and there were 39 more ships waiting in fold space, then ordering her fleet to open fire was the last decision she would ever make. The problem was that she could not tell which scenario was real. And Kira had not survived 11 pacification campaigns by making important decisions when she could not tell which scenario was real. She watched the timer on her console count down. 6 minutes left. She had not heard back from Dagon. She would not hear back from Dagon. Not in 10 minutes, not in 30, not in the time it would take for her message to even finish crossing the distance to his throne world. She was on her own. 5 minutes. Her weapons officer, Pol, was watching her from across the bridge. He had one hand near his console, not touching it, just near it, waiting for the word. Pol was good at his job. He had never hesitated in 11 years of service. He would fire the moment she told him to, and he would not think twice about it. 4 minutes. Kira made her decision. Pol, she said, target the human ship. Full broadside. All forward cannons. All torpedo banks. On my mark. On the Baekdu, Rena watched the weapons lock warnings light up across her tactical display. She had expected this. She would have been surprised if it had gone any other way. Kira was a military officer who had been given a direct challenge to her authority in front of her entire fleet. Backing down without at least attempting to fight was not something a Velthari admiral could do and keep her command. "They're targeting us," her tactical officer reported. His name was Dowan, and he had been with the Phase Fold program for 6 years. He was very good at not sounding alarmed when alarming things were happening. "I see it," Rena said. "Stand by fold drive. Prepare exit coordinates. Position 7. Position 7 confirmed. Ready." Rena watched the weapons lock indicators. When they shifted from targeting to active charge, she would have perhaps 3 seconds before the first shot. They shifted. "Fold," she said. The Baekdu vanished. The Eternal Dominion fired a broadside that could have cracked a small moon. Cannons that had leveled cities on 11 different worlds discharged all at once, pouring energy into the space where the human ship had been standing not 3 seconds before. Torpedo banks added their fire to the volley. The full weight of the most powerful warship in the Imperial fleet hit nothing but empty space, and kept going. Kira stared at her sensor screen. No debris, no heat signature, no residual energy reading that would indicate a ship had been destroyed. The Baekdu had not been hit. It had not even tried to dodge the incoming fire. It had simply stopped being there. Contact lost, Thos reported, unnecessarily. Kira gripped the edge of her console. Expand sensor sweep, find it. Already running, Admiral, there's nothing. The alert came from the rear of the fleet. Not a sensor warning this time, an impact warning. A ship in the rearmost line of the formation had just taken a direct hit, then another. Kira spun to her tactical display and saw the Baekdu's energy signature. Appearing behind her fleet, weapons hot, firing at the unshielded rear sections of her rearguard vessels before any of them had time to rotate and respond. Then it was gone again. Then it was on the left flank, then above the formation, then inside it, 20 meters from one of her cruisers, firing point blank before vanishing before the cruiser could even bring its guns to bear. It appeared, fired, and left, each emergence lasting only a few seconds, long enough to get a clean shot, short enough that returning fire was nearly impossible. The fleet's gunners were shooting at coordinates where the ship had been, not where it was. The targeting computers could not track something that moved by dropping out of reality entirely. Kira began issuing orders rapidly, trying to tighten the formation, trying to create overlapping fields of fire, trying to reduce the angles from which the human ship could emerge and attack. She was good at this. She had trained for complex multi-vector engagements. But every tactic she had been trained for assumed that the enemy was in space, present, trackable, subject to the same physics that everything else obeyed. The Baekdu was not obeying the same physics. For 16 minutes, one human ship fought 300 Imperial vessels and took no damage. Then the other 39 arrived. They did not arrive the way a fleet normally arrives, in formation, engines burning, crossing space from a distance with enough time for the enemy to prepare. They arrived the way the Baekdu had arrived, all at once, in every direction, inside the Imperial formation and around it and through it. 40 human warships materialized simultaneously across the entire width and depth of the fleet, close enough to individual Imperial ships that in some cases their hulls were within weapons range before anyone on those ships had processed what was happening. The Imperial fleet's sensor network, which had been designed to track targets at range, had nothing useful to offer. You cannot track an approach that has no approach. You cannot prepare a defense for an attack that begins at point-blank range. For a long moment, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5, nothing happened. 40 human ships sat inside and around the Imperial formation, weapons locked, and did not fire. Tay's voice came across the fleet-wide channel. He had been watching everything from the facility below, and he had coordinated the emergence timing himself, working with each ship's navigator to ensure they all came out at exactly the same moment. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "This is Commander Tay of United Earth Defense Command. You have fired on one of our vessels. We are within our rights to respond in kind. However, I want to give you a second opportunity to stand down, because I would prefer not to destroy your fleet if it can be avoided." There was a pause. "I am not saying this because we cannot destroy your fleet. I am saying it because 300 ships represent 300 crews, and I do not think they deserve to die for a decision their admiral made without full information. Please stand your forces down. Signal your emperor. Tell him that the situation has changed." The Imperial fleet hung in space, completely surrounded, every ship within the formation bracketed by a human vessel that had appeared from nowhere and could disappear again before a single shot reached it. Kira looked at her tactical display for a long time. Her fleet was not in a battle. The difference mattered. In a battle, you could fight, maneuver, find an angle. In a trap, fighting only made the walls tighter. She had never been in a trap before. "All ships," she said at last, her voice flat and controlled. "Hold fire. Maintain current positions." She paused. "Do not engage." She looked at Thos. He was watching her. So was Paul. So was every person on the bridge. "Open a channel to the human commander," she said quietly. A human warship emerged out of thin air. The Galactic Empire underestimated humanity. The channel opened, and for a moment neither side said anything. Kira stood at the front of her bridge in the silence of a woman who had commanded fleets for 30 years and had never once had to say what she was about to say. She was not a person who believed in wasting time on emotion. Emotion was a resource, like fuel or ammunition, useful in the right amounts, dangerous when it was not controlled. She had kept hers controlled for her entire career. But this was a different kind of moment. "Commander Tay," she said at last. "Admiral Kira," Tay answered. "I need to understand something before we go further." She looked at her tactical display. 40 human ships, still holding position, still weapons hot, surrounding her fleet like a closed fist. "You had this capability for how long?" There was a brief pause from the other end of the channel. "The first successful fold test was 21 years ago," Tay said. "The first combat-capable vessel was completed 2 years ago. The fleet you are looking at has been fully assembled for approximately 14 months. Kira was quiet for a moment. "You waited." "Yes. You could have shown us this years ago. You could have used it to push back when we first arrived." "You could have." "We could have," Tay agreed, "but we were not ready years ago. And I do not mean technically. I mean completely. I needed to be certain that when we did this, we did it right. I needed the right ships, the right crews, and the right moment." A pause. "And I needed you to be fully committed. I needed your emperor to have sent his best admiral with his largest fleet, so that when this conversation happened, there would be no confusion about whether the Empire understood the situation." "And you believe the Empire understands the situation now?" "I believe you do," Tay said. "Whether your emperor does is a conversation you will need to have with him." Kira stood her fleet down formally 40 minutes after that conversation ended. The process was procedural. She sent the cease engagement order to every ship, logged the decision through the official command chain, and began the process of composing the most difficult report she had ever written. She was thorough about it. She did not minimize what had happened or try to soften the facts. She wrote down the numbers, the timeline, the capabilities she had observed, and her honest assessment of the situation. The human fleet had emerged undetected. One vessel had engaged her entire fleet for 16 minutes and taken 0 damage. 40 ships had surrounded her formation simultaneously, from inside and outside the defensive perimeter, before a single defensive response was possible. Her fleet had fired first and hit nothing. The humans had returned fire only with the Baekdu, only briefly, and had not attempted to destroy any vessel. They had targeted propulsion systems and weapon emplacements, disabling rather than killing. She wrote that last part twice, because she thought it was important that Dagon understand it. They could have destroyed ships. They had chosen not to. That was a message in itself. She sent the report and stood at the viewport of the Eternal Dominion and looked at Earth. Small, blue, quiet, the same way it had looked when she arrived. It looked exactly the same, and it was completely different. Emperor Dagon received Kira's report 11 hours after it was sent. He read it in his private chambers, alone, which was not how he usually received military briefings. He normally had his senior staff present, and his advisors, and at least 2 communications officers to handle the immediate response. He had dismissed all of them before opening the file. He read it straight through without stopping. Then, he read it again. He sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Dagon was not a man who made mistakes often. He had built his empire on good information and careful calculation. He had a gift for identifying threats before they became dangerous, for seeing what other rulers missed, for understanding the difference between a species that was weak and a species that was merely waiting. It was the quality that had made him dangerous, and the quality that had made him successful. And he had missed this entirely. 43 years, 17 directives, not one of them answered. He had taken the silence as submission. He had read the absence of response as the absence of capability. He had made an assumption, the oldest, most common, most fatal assumption that powerful people made about less powerful ones. He had assumed that because they were quiet, they had nothing to say. He thought about the message Tay had sent to Kira during the standoff. I needed you to be fully committed. I needed your emperor to have sent his best admiral with his largest fleet. They had waited for the Empire's maximum expression of power, and then they had made it irrelevant. He called his senior staff back in and began the process of opening formal negotiations with Earth. The negotiations took 4 months. Tay led the human delegation. Kira, to her own surprise, was assigned by Dagon to lead the Imperial side. Dagon's reasoning, which he shared with no one, was that Kira was the only person in his government who had actually seen what humanity could do, and he needed someone across the table who was not still operating on old assumptions. It was not a comfortable 4 months. There were arguments. There were walkouts. There were nights when both delegations went back to their respective ships, certain that an agreement was impossible, and that the whole thing would collapse by morning. But it did not collapse. The final agreement recognized Earth as a sovereign world, not a vassal, not a tributary, not a registered low-tier colony in imperial records. A sovereign world with full rights of self-determination, independent foreign policy, and the right to maintain its own defense forces. In exchange, humanity agreed to enter a non-aggression framework with the Empire, and to participate in a joint scientific exchange program that both sides understood was largely an excuse to keep talking to each other until they figured out how to stop being afraid of what the other one could do. It was not a perfect agreement. No agreement between two species who had spent 43 years in a state of deliberate silence was ever going to be perfect. But it was real, and it held. The message went out 6 days after the agreement was signed. Tay had written it himself, in a single sitting, at a desk in the same underground facility where the Bec-Du had been built. He had not consulted anyone on the wording. He had not run it by communication staff, or diplomatic advisors, or anyone else. He had written what he thought needed to be said, and then he had sent it. It went to every known civilization in the galaxy, every species in the Imperial network, every independent world, every neutral power and minor colony and emerging civilization that the Empire's communication channels could reach. It went out as a standard broadcast, no cipher, no encoding, readable by anyone with a basic translation array. It was not long. It was 3 sentences. We were quiet because we were working. We are no longer quiet. Choose your next moves carefully. Attached to the message was a recording, 17 minutes and 42 seconds of unedited footage from the engagement around Mars, the Bec-Du emerging from fold space, the Imperial broadside hitting nothing, the fleet of 40 ships appearing from nowhere inside the Imperial formation, the stand-down order, and the beginning of the negotiations. No narration, just the footage, clean and unaltered, available for anyone in the galaxy to watch and reach their own conclusions. In the facility beneath the mountain, Rena sat with Tay and Yuno and the rest of the senior staff and watched the signal trace its way outward on the communications map. A ripple spreading across the galaxy, touching world after world after world. Yuno was the oldest one there. She had started this work when Rena was still a child, and Tay was still in school. She had spent most of her adult life on a project that she had known, for most of that time, might never be finished, might be cancelled, might fail, might matter too late or not at all. She had kept going anyway, because the alternative was giving up, and she did not know how to do that. She watched the signal map and did not say anything for a long time. Then she looked at the people around her, the crew who had built the ships, the pilots who had flown them, the negotiators who had sat across from the Empire for 4 months without blinking, and she smiled. "We told them," she said simply. Outside the facility, under the same cold sky that had always been there, Earth turned slowly in the dark. The stars looked the same as they always had, but they were not the same, not anymore, not for any species looking up at them tonight and wondering what had just changed. Humanity had been quiet for 43 years. It was not going to be quiet anymore.